Can you take me through your week?
Yeah.
First getting cut and then immediately picking up with another team.
Yeah, so I was waived by Seattle, and then I think I had about 3 hours left of my 48 hours, and I get a call about Indiana wanting to pick me up, and then it was basically pack up my whole apartment and get out on a flight early the next morning, and now I'm here.
Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. So obviously, Grace VanSlooten has signed for the Indiana Fever, and today I'm going to break down exactly what this means, what she brings to the roster, and why I genuinely believe this is a much bigger move than people are giving it credit for. Now, let's be clear from the start. This is not a headline-grabbing superstar signing. This is not a move that immediately changes the Indiana Fever ceiling overnight. But it is still an important piece of roster construction, and in the long run, it could end up being one of those under-the-radar moves that actually matters a lot more than people realize right now. If you're asking me to rate the immediate impact of Grace VanSlooten on a scale from 1 to 10 this season, I'm probably sitting at a 3. And I don't say that as an insult. I say that because her role right now is not about immediate dominance. It's about development, adjustment, and long-term fit. Grace VanSlooten is, in my view, a long-term project. That's the key phrase here. This is not a finished product walking into the Indiana Fever system. This is a player the organization is investing in over time. Now, if you go back to her draft profile and her college trajectory, Grace VanSlooten is actually a really interesting case. She slid in the draft process, and that slide was heavily influenced by how her senior season was evaluated. When you look at her overall college production, the numbers are actually very stable. Across her 4 years in college, she consistently produced similar stat lines. There wasn't some dramatic breakout year or some catastrophic drop-off. She was fairly consistent, which in some ways is both a strength and a limitation. After the 2023-2024 season and her transition into Michigan State, she was being projected as a legitimate top 10 pick. At that point in the cycle, a lot of scouts and analysts had her locked in as a first-round talent, especially with the expansion of teams and the increasing demand for versatile forwards. She was trending in that direction for most of the year. In fact, she held first-round projections all the way up until her senior season evaluations really started to weigh heavily on decision-makers. The biggest talking point that hurt her stock was efficiency and perimeter shooting. She shot around 50% from the field, which is solid, but she did not meaningfully develop her three-point shooting. That's where the concern comes in, because I think a lot of people look at modern forwards and assume spacing is part of the package. But Grace VanSlooten is not really a perimeter shooter right now, and that's important to understand when projecting her role. Maybe she develops that part of her game later, but coming out of her senior season, there just wasn't enough evidence to suggest she's a reliable stretch threat. That's something she'll need to work on if she wants to expand her offensive value at the next level. Even at the free throw line, she's not elite. She's more in that mid-60s range, which is passable, but not ideal. You'd like to see closer to 75% or higher from a player in her position. That said, context matters. She's not someone who is going to live at the free throw line every game, so it doesn't completely define her offensive profile. Overall, the shooting concerns exist, but they don't erase what she does well, because when you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, this is where the Indiana Fever are clearly thinking long-term. Grace VanSlooten being on a multi-year contract situation gives them control. If she develops, they retain her value at a fixed cost. If she exceeds expectations, they don't have to enter a bidding war. That type of roster control is extremely valuable in the WNBA ecosystem. She is under team control through the end of 2029 season, and potentially beyond depending on how things develop. That matters a lot more than people are acknowledging right now. Now, if you actually go and watch film, especially her performances in competitive settings, there's a lot to like. There were clips circulating from Hoop by Basket showing her defensive activity and transition impact. And what stands out immediately is her willingness to engage physically and defensively on the perimeter. She has taken assignments against guards like Kelsey Mitchell, which is not an easy task for a forward. That alone tells you something about her competitiveness and defensive willingness. There are sequences where she gets a steal and immediately pushes the ball in transition, going coast to coast and finishing through contact, even in traffic. That kind of self-initiated transition offense is not something every forward in her archetype is comfortable doing. When you compare that to players like Kiki Iriafen, the contrast becomes clear. Kiki Iriafen has length and interior presence, but Grace VanSlooten offers a different type of mobility and body control in space. She's more fluid in transition situations and more comfortable handling the ball after a defensive play. You also see her involved in dribble handoff actions, quick pitch passes, and short roll decision-making. There are moments where she's operating as a connector rather than a pure finisher, and that's important in modern offensive systems. Defensively, she's not a rim protector. That needs to be stated clearly. She is not someone who is going to anchor the paint or consistently deter shots at the rim. But the flip side is that very few players combine mobility, strength, and perimeter defensive willingness with that type of offensive versatility. People often ask, why don't teams just get an athletic rim protector who can shoot? The reality is that player is extremely rare. If that archetype existed in abundance, they would not be available anywhere near the middle or late lottery range. They would be premium assets. So teams are forced to make trade-offs. And the Indiana Fever are clearly betting on versatility, development, and system fit, rather than a perfect prototype. There were also prospects like Maddie Siegrist and others in that range, but even those evaluations vary depending on team needs. I'm not going to sit here and pretend every decision is obvious in hindsight. That's not how roster building works at this level. At the same time, I'm not in the position of making those draft selections. I'm evaluating them. And from that perspective, the signing of Grace VanSlooten is a strong long-term evaluation piece. Now, I do think this move also changes internal competition dynamics, especially around players like Kiki Iriafen, because now you potentially have overlapping roles, and that naturally creates a situation where performance in training camp and rotations matters even more. In a reset scenario, in a fantasy draft environment, there's a strong argument that Kiki Iriafen would be evaluated below Grace VanSlooten in certain projection models. That's not emotional. It's based on current skill translation versus upside trajectory. And again, I was actually surprised she cleared waivers. That tells you other teams either underestimated her value or were constrained by roster flexibility. Because once she showed flashes in real game environments, especially against the Indiana Fever, her stock clearly shifted. That's also why roster management in the WNBA is so complex. If a developmental player is exposed and performs, other teams will react quickly. There's very little margin for error. We saw that exact scenario here. If Grace VanSlooten had not performed in those opportunities, she might have gone unnoticed, but she did show enough flashes to force attention, and ultimately that led to Indiana stepping in and securing her. She was even projected in some mock drafts earlier in the cycle to land with the Indiana Fever, sometimes as high as the lottery range around pick 10. That kind of early projection matters because it shows there was already belief in her profile before the draft flight happened. And yes, she did slide, but it's important to contextualize that slide. Not every player improves linearly year over year. Some prospects plateau statistically, but still carry underlying tools that teams value long term. And we also cannot ignore her international experience. Grace VanSlooten has represented Team USA at the AmeriCup, where she started, played significant minutes, and contributed in high-leverage situations. In the final, she played 25 minutes and finished with a plus-minus of plus 19 in a 2-point game. That is meaningful. That shows she can operate in structured, competitive environments against strong international opposition. So when you combine all of that, the defensive versatility, the transition ability, the physical profile, the international experience, and the long-term contract control, you start to see why the Indiana Fever made this move. It's not about what she is today, it's about what she can become over time within the right system. And that's why I think this signing is more important than it looks at first glance. Tell me what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Can you take me through your week? First getting cut and then immediately picking up with another team.
Yeah, so I was waived by Seattle, and then I think I had about 3 hours left of my 48 hours, and I get a call about Indiana wanting to pick me up, and then it was basically pack up my whole apartment and get out on a flight early the next morning, and now I'm here.
You had gone back after your game here and then
Yes,
had to come
yeah,
right back here?
I was in Seattle, so yeah, went from Indiana to Seattle, now back to Indiana.
What are your impressions of this team and how you might fit what they do?
Yeah, so far, everybody's been great, really welcoming. You know, they seem to want to run and play fast, and that's what I'm all about, so hopefully it's a great fit.
Just coming in, obviously, no practice, but just coming in, being available for a game. Just what is that like for you, especially rookie season?
Yeah, hectic for sure. You know, I got a couple plays under my belt, so I'm hoping to use those, 3 to 4 plays that I actually know. So, gonna really rely on communication from my teammates, and I've heard that they're great communicators. So, putting a lot of trust in them to, kind of tell me where to be on the floor and tell me what to do. So, I know they'll be great helping me out.
I guess for fans who haven't seen you before, how do you describe your game?
I would describe it as just blue collar, work hard, run fast, rebound, kind of do whatever needs to be done on the floor. That's kind of what I aim to do every time I go in. So also consider myself pretty versatile. So I guess that kind of sums it up a little bit.
Yeah, with that, I know one season in college, you seem to have maybe more of a green light from 3 than others.
Yeah.
Like where state played differently. So 2 out of 3 so far in the W from outside the arc. I guess how are you feeling with shooting from the outside?
Yeah, I mean, I'm feeling better about it than in college. Obviously still a lot of work for improvement. So I'm going to keep honing in on that and just kind of perfecting that part of my game. And I think that's kind of my next step is really how my game will grow. So really focusing on that.
Yeah, and being from Toledo, not too far away, all things
no.
considered, a little closer than Seattle.
Yes.
Any family or friends able to hustle over here for tonight?
Yeah, my dad and then a family friend coming down. So they were super pumped that I'll only be 3.5 hours away.
Yeah. Besides Sunday night, I know you played here, obviously, in the Big Ten tournament in the past. Did you ever attend a game here as a fan?
I have not attended a game, but I played my junior and senior year. The Big Ten tournament was here, so those are the only times I've been here. Yeah.
Good.